So we'll try that again. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the technical problems up front. It's 7:30, and we're going to talk about one of the more popular topics of Jewish observance, and that, of course, is the topic of fasting. I think that we say a lot about the story of every holiday is they attacked us, we killed them, now let's eat. The holidays that we're going to talk about now are not like that. Actually, they're more along the lines of they attacked us, they killed us, and in remembrance of that, and in order to achieve the repentance that we need to get in light of what we've suffered, we're not going to eat, but we're going to fast. This is not a popular item to talk about during the summer, but Jews all over the world are doing this, and I don't think we'd be doing justice if we didn't at least look at these occasions, and people can decide if they know about it, whether or not they are going to do it. If people have no idea what it is, then the decision has already been made for them. And I think that that's the worst possible outcome. So we're going to talk over the next 3 weeks about the 3 weeks, which we are in. The fast of the 17th of Tammuz was on Sunday, and 2 Sundays from now, at the end of July, we're going to have the fast of the 9th of Av. And so tonight we're going to talk about those 2 fasts, what they mean for us in history, and how we can think about them. For the next class, I think we're going to talk about fasting in general, why somebody would want to do that, why it's useful. And then I think for the final class before Tisha B'Av, we'll do the important question of, well, do we really have to do this? Is it really required for us to do this fast? Some people say no, some people say yes. As always, it's up to, in the end, it's up to every individual, whether they're going to fast or not. But we want to give people the tools so they can make an educated decision, and not have the decision be made by inertia, which is a terrible way to do anything. So we're going to talk about these 2 fast days on the calendar, the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. We're going to start with this Mishnah from the tractate of Ta'anit. Ta'anit is just the word for fasting in rabbinic Hebrew. And the Mishnah is it's one of the first codes of Jewish law. It really is the rabbinic code of Jewish law. It dates from around the year 200, and it represents the editorial work of Rebbe Yehuda HaNasi, who we just call Rebbe because the Mishnah is so important. But this is the compilation of all of the arguments from the days of Shammai and Hillel, people like Rebbe Akiva and Rebbe Ishmael, and they all get organized into this work called the Mishnah. And so in this particular teaching of the Mishnah, and we'll just read it, it says, 5 events befell our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz, which was last Sunday, and 5 on the 9th of Av, which is 3 weeks later. At the end of July on Sunday, we'll have the 9th of Av. On the 17th of Tammuz, the tablets were broken, the Tamid offering was ended, the city walls were breached, Apostamos burned the Torah, and an idol was placed in the temple courtyard. These are all things that happened on the 17th of Tammuz. On the 9th of Av, it was decreed upon our ancestors that they would not be allowed to enter the land of Israel. The first and the second temples were destroyed. Beitar was captured, and the city of Jerusalem plowed over. And so we learned from this that when the month of Av starts, which is between these two dates, we reduce joy. We take on a bit of a somber tone. I just want to go through this Mishnah carefully because we've just read a lot of things, and I don't know that everybody is clear on what all of these events are. And so I think it's useful to highlight each of them in order to increase our appreciation of what we are doing. And so we'll start with the 17th of Tammuz. And it says the first thing about the 17th of Tammuz, the tablets were broken. I hope you like the funny picture here. It made me laugh, at least. I mean, obviously, we're not talking about the iPads, the iPhones, or the Androids. But when it says the tablets were broken, we're talking about the Luchot Tabrit, the tablets that Moses brought down from Sinai. And to understand how this relates to the 17th of Tammuz, you have to recognize that there is a whole there's a deep connection between Shavuot, the 17th of Tammuz, and Yom Kippur that involves the choreography of Moshe going up and down the mountain to bring down tablets, to appease God, etc., etc. And the story goes something like this. So on Shavuot, Moses goes up to the mountain for the first time, just like we read in the book of Exodus. And he is up there for 40 days and 40 nights. He gets the first set of tablets. And after 40 days, he comes down. And we know that in the meantime, something terrible had happened in the camp. There was the sin of the golden calf. And because he saw the sin of the golden calf, he was angry. He threw the first set of tablets on the ground and he broke them into a bunch of pieces. You know, they never explain why they just couldn't sort of tape them together, or I don't know. But for whatever reason, they couldn't do it. Some people say that they were miraculous sort of tablets, and the miraculous part of them was damaged, and they couldn't just use Gorilla Glue or something. But that takes us to the 17th of Tammuz, about 40 days between Shavuot and the 17th of Tammuz. From the 17th of Tammuz to the 1st of Elul, we have about another 40 days. And you always have to use the about squiggle when you talk about this, because you don't know precisely you never know precisely how many days in a month they're going to be in an unfixed calendar. And the Jewish calendar, of course, was not fixed in the time of the rabbis, and more so the time of Moses, that it could have been either 29 or 30 days. So it's approximate. In the end, you can always work it out, because you can say that, well, this month was short and this month was long. You can always make the numbers work in the end. So that 40 days between the 17th of Tammuz and the 1st of Elul, Moses is begging God not to kill all of us. He's involved in very, very deep prayer, and he's beseeching God not to kill us all. And God agrees not to kill us. And he agrees to make a second set of tablets. And to get these tablets, Moses has to be up there for another 40 days or 40 nights. And so that begins at the 1st of Elul and goes through Yom Kippur. And that's why we look at this whole season from the 1st of Elul to Yom Kippur as itself a season of repentance. The Sephardim start to say Salichot on the 1st of Elul. Even Ashkenazim start to blow the shofar on the 1st of Elul, because this is a full 40-day period of repentance. The only thing that I've always wondered, and no one has really explained to me, I think, adequately, is that if we blow the shofar for Elul, because it's part of this period of repentance, then after Rosh Hashanah, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we should blow the shofar too. I mean, it's still in that 40 days. Well, we don't for whatever reason, but that's the this is the choreography. 40 days between Shavuot and the 17th of Tammuz, 40 days between the 17th of Tammuz and the 1st of Elul, and 40 days between the 1st of Elul and Yom Kippur. And so this is how we get the tradition that it's on the 17th of Tammuz that the luchot, that the tablets were broken. The second thing that the Mishnah tells us on the 17th of Tammuz is that the Tamid offering was discontinued. And this is a good time to talk about the Tamid offering because we're in Parsha Pinchas this week, and you should all come to shul. And we're going to read about this offering. Every day in the temple, holiday or not a holiday, but every day there was a requirement to have these offerings that consisted of 2 yearling lambs without blemish. And to the side here is the text from Parsha Pinchas. We do one in the morning and we do the other one at twilight, Bein Har Abayim. And this is just something that's supposed to happen every day. And the way to think of this is the equivalent of the guy in front of the courthouse walking out in the morning to raise Old Glory to the top, and then walking out in the evening to lower the flag to the bottom of the pole. It's a ritual that tells you that the country is still working. That the nation of Israel is in session, that we're doing this Tamid offering. And so one of the things that happened according to tradition on the 17th of Tammuz is that this offering was discontinued. We don't know why it was discontinued. There are different theories. I mean, some people think that we were already under the influence of foreign governments and they just forbade us to do it. Other people speculate, well, look, Jerusalem was under siege, and sometimes when you're under siege, it's hard to bring in animals to do a daily sacrifice, and at some point they ran out of animals, and this was what happened on the 17th of Tammuz. It was a transformative moment in the history of Judaism, because we have a remnant of these 2 offerings today that we all know about. The service of Shacharit that we pray every morning and the service of Mincha that we pray in the afternoon are patterned after these 2 services, these 2 sacrifices. So we continue to be open for business, but we had to change the way that we practice. We had to change the way that we do things. One of the interesting things we're going to see is that for when the Mishnah tells us about one or the other of these things, we are never sure whether it's talking about the first temple, which was destroyed in the year 587 BCE, or it's talking about the second temple, which was destroyed in the year 70 CE. And we had 2 destroyed temples. And so the Tamid was discontinued twice. Does this mean that it was discontinued on the 17th of Tammuz for both of the destructions, or for just one of the destructions? We're not sure. We're not sure. But this great rip in the fabric of Judaism up to that point occurred on the 17th of Tammuz. The city walls were breached on the 17th of Tammuz, according to tradition and according to Scripture. We have a passage from Yirmiyahu 52. Sidkiyahu, who was one of the last kings, he rebelled against the king of Babylon. The deal was that we would be allowed to have kings if we didn't rebel. That was the one rule. And in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, King Nebuchadnezzar moved against Jerusalem with his whole army. They besieged it and they built towers against it all around. The city continued in a state of siege until the 11th year of King Sediyahu. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine had become acute in the city. There was no food left for the common people. Then the wall of the city was breached. So we have at least a month here. Write down, Tammuz is the 4th month. According to this, though, it was on the 9th day of the 4th month, not the 17th day. And the question is then, well, why do we do it on the 17th of Tammuz and not on the 9th of Tammuz? Most answers are that, well, we had 2 of these destructions, and even if this one wasn't on the 17th, the second one was. And we didn't really want to have a situation where we had 2 fast days for the same thing, one right after the other. That could have been disorienting to have the fast of the 9th of Tammuz, then the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, then the fast of the 9th of Av. Too many fast days, even for Jews. And so so it's close enough for government work anyway. But we have this tradition that on the 17th of Tammuz that the walls of the city were breached by either the Romans or by the Babylonians or by both. We're also told that on the 17th of Tammuz that Apostomus burned the Sefer Torah. And we don't really have a real handle on who this Apostomus guy was. He's not preserved anywhere else in the tradition. Some people think that this is a corruption of the name Antiochus, who of course was the Syrian king who inspired the Hanukkah holiday by forbidding us to have Milah, celebrate Shabbat, and those things. Maybe he burned a Sefer Torah too. But many people look to a parallel in the writings of Josephus. Josephus is a Judean who goes over to the other side. He goes over to the Roman side at some point under circumstances that may have been more or less than honorable, depending on whose perspective you're looking at. But Josephus writes 2 great histories of the time in Greek, and he's a great ambassador of the Jewish people to the Greek civilization. The first book he writes is the Antiquities of the Jews, and the second one, the classic book he writes, is the Jewish War, which is the great account of the war between the Romans and the Jews in the 2nd century. But in the last part of his book of the Antiquities, he has this description of something that took place around the year 50. So this would be 20 years or so before the Second Temple was destroyed. It says, now as this devastation was making, one of the soldiers seized the laws of Moses that lay in those villages as they were ransacking, and brought them out before the eyes of all present, and tore them to pieces. And this was done with reproachful language and much scurrility. They were real jerks about it. Which things, when the Jews heard of, they ran together, and that in great numbers came down to Caesarea, where Cumanus, and he was the council then was, and besought him that he would avenge not themselves, but God himself, whose laws had been affronted, for that they could not bear to live any longer, if the laws of their forefathers must be affronted after this manner. And so this is one possibility for who Apostomus is. But this Mishnah is the only place where this name is preserved. So we don't have a clear sense from our tradition of who he is. And the tradition from Josephus is intriguing, but I don't think anybody would say this is definitive. And finally, on the 17th of Tammuz, an idol was placed in the temple. And here we have the problem that we have with all of these things. We don't know which temple is being referred to in the Mishnah. Are they referring to the first temple or to the second temple? If they're referring to the second temple, I mean, some people read this actively and they say it's this guy Apostomus, that Apostomus placed an idol in the temple. So that's a possibility, but it's also a possibility that this is referring back to the time of the first temple and to the notorious reign of King Menashe, who was a terrible, terrible, terrible king. Among killing innocent people, he also incorporated a large amount of avodah zarah, of idol worship, into the temple in Jerusalem. This is a little excerpt from the Sistine Chapel. It's the basis of this is a verse in the book of Matthew that's describing the genealogy of Jesus of Nazareth, and it says in Latin there, Chezkiyahu, Menashe, and Ammon. And the person sitting there sulking a bit, yeah, this guy is considered to be Menashe, and he's upset because he's led a terrible life, and it's all coming home to roost. The Talmud says of Menashe that he made an image as heavy as 1,000 men, and every day it slew all of them. Maybe so, probably because they had to carry it around, or it would fall on him. But Menashe was a terrible, terrible king. His rule led to the destruction ultimately of the kingdom of Yehudah. And so it's possible that this Mishnah, when it's talking about the 17th of Tammuz, that it's referring to something that occurred in the time of the first temple during the reign of Menashe. And those are the 17th of Tammuz things. And so the second half of the Mishnah, it talks us about the 9th of Av, the end point of this 3 weeks. The 17th of Tammuz begins the 3-week period. The 9th of Av ends the 3-week period. And so what happened on the 9th of Av? What bad things happened on the 9th of Av? Well, one bad thing that happened on the 9th of Av is it was decreed that the children of Israel would not enter the land. This was a few weeks ago in Parasha Shalach Lecha. And the Talmud explains how the rabbis know this. You just have to find points that you know are real points, and you use those as your anchors, and then you take other dates and you build on that to make your argument. And so the Talmud says that we know that the tabernacle was erected on the 1st of Nisan, and we know that the cloud lifted from it on ER 20, which was almost 2 months later. If we look at the narrative, then it talks about the people complaining for 3 days, and they were granted famously a full month of quail. It was all in Shalach Lecha. Miriam is locked up for 7 days. She is for being rude to Moshe. So if we add that 7 days on to the 22nd of Sivan, where we were before, we're at the 29th of Sivan. And immediately after that, in the narrative, the spies are sent out at the beginning of Parsha Shalach Lecha. And we know that they were sent for 40 days. So if they were sent around the end of the month of Sivan, they'd be coming back right around the 9th of Av. And so we can learn from that it was on the 9th of Av that there was this catastrophe where the spies returned. They gave their terrible report. And because of this report, we weren't able to enter the land. It's there's nowhere in the Bible that says during Parshat Shalach Lecha, and so it happened on the 9th of Av. The Bible rarely gives dates, and if it gives dates, it doesn't use Babylonian months that names that often. But we can, by looking at things that we do know, we can extrapolate to things that are unknown, and this is the rabbinic extrapolation to show that it's on the 9th of Av that the decree was given against the spies. Also, on the 9th of Av, we have this tradition that this was the date that the first temple was destroyed. And there's two verses, one in the book of Kings, another one in the book of Jeremiah that relates this. In the book of Kings, it says, on the 7th day of the 5th month, that's the 7th of Av, that was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, an officer of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, that's to say the temple, the king's palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. He burned down the house of every notable person. And this is the verse of from Kings, which fixed the destruction of the temple to the 7th of Av. And we read in Jeremiah in the 52nd chapter. It is very close to this. On the 10th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, came to represent the king of Babylon in Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, the king's palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. He burned down the house of every notable person. The language here is almost identical, but instead of the 7th day of the 5th month, it says the 10th day of the 5th month, the 10th of Av. And so the question is, well, we have one verse that says we have this happening on the 7th of Av. Another verse says that it happens on the 10th of Av. And the Talmud says, well, the 9th of Av is kind of in the middle. It started the destruction on the 7th of Av. It was done by the 10th of Av. So the real moment of destruction was probably the 9th of Av. And so we identify this date as the date that the first temple was destroyed. We also identify this date as the date that the second temple was destroyed. And how we do this is very interesting. You would think that since the destruction of the Second Temple was 2,000 years ago or so, but it happened 600 years after the destruction of the First Temple. So you might think that we'd have really, really good records about it if we could fix the destruction of the First Temple to between 4 days, between the 7th of Av and the 10th of Av. Well, how much more so should we be able to, with historical records, say, for the Second Temple, it was exactly on this particular date that it happened. But we can't. We rely on tradition here. And the Talmud Bavli Ta'anit in this case says the rule here is that good things tend to happen on good days and bad things tend to happen on bad days. And the 9th of Av was a bad day. And so we know that even though we have a tradition that was sometime in the summer, probably of the year 70 A.D., we fixed the date in accordance with this rule, that good things tend to happen on good days and bad things tend to happen on bad days. The 9th of Av is a bad day, and so we hold that that's the date of the destruction of the Second Temple. Very, very poignant is that the 9th of Av is also the day that Beitar was captured. Beitar was the last redoubt. It was the last fortress of the Bar Chokbah rebellion, 50 years after the destruction of the temple. And the defeat of Bar Chokbah there was the very end of Judean independence for the next 2,000 years or so. It was truly the final gasp. It was the final gasp. And it was a very traumatic episode for all of Judah. They think that in order to quell the rebellion, 2 full legions of Romans were dispatched to Yehuda, and they probably killed, according to tradition, they killed around 600,000 Jews in putting down this rebellion. There's a long segment that describes the destruction of Beitar in a midrashic work on the Book of Lamentations. Lamentations, of course, Echa is what we read on the evening of Tisha B'Av, and this is a midrashic working of it, talking about Beitar. It says, "They slew the inhabitants until the horses waded in blood up to the nostrils, and the blood rolled along stones and flowed into the sea, staining it for a distance of 6 kilometers. For 6 kilometers out into the ocean, you saw blood. And do you think that Beitar is close to the sea? It's not close. It's up in the Judean hills. It says here it's 60 kilometers from the ocean. Now Hadrian, the emperor, possessed a large vineyard, 46 kilometers square, as far as from Tiberias to Sepphoris. And they surrounded this vineyard with a fence consisting of the slain of Beitar. And it was decreed that they should not be buried until a later emperor arose and ordered their interment. And you may not know this, you may not be aware of this, but there's a liturgical practice that we do every day that's related to the siege of Beitar. And that's when we say Birchat Hamazon, the blessing after the meals. The blessing after the meals is considered to consist of 4 blessings. The first 3 blessings are considered to be what they call deoraita, from the Torah, and they're considered to have been established or ordained or set by Moshe, by Joshua, and by Shlomo or David. I can't remember which one. But the respective themes of these first blessings are for sustenance, which Moshe established because he's associated with the manna. With the land of Israel is the second one, and that's why it's associated with Yehoshua, because he conquered the land. And the third one is associated with the temple, with the Beit HaMikdash, which is associated with David and Shlomo, because David was the one who captured Jerusalem, and Shlomo was the one who was entitled to ultimately build the Beit HaMikdash there. So those are the first 3. There's a 4th blessing of Birchat HaMazon, though. And the 4th blessing is not considered to be the Oraita. It's not considered to be from the Torah or from the law. It's from the rabbis. It's the Rabbanan. And it's called Hatov Umativ, that the God who is good and does things of goodness, in this 4th blessing. And we say this in memory of the miracle associated with Beitar. And this is from the tradition at the end of this parak of Midrash. Rabbi Huna said, on the day when the slain of Beitar were allowed burial, we instituted this benediction of Hatov Umetiv. Hatov, because the bodies, which the Romans refused to permit to be buried, they did not putrefy. Umetiv, and because they were ultimately able to be buried. And so this blessing is always said with the intention, with the understanding that this was established in memory of a miracle that was associated with one of the greatest military defeats in the entire history of the Jewish people. Beitar is a name that rings down throughout Jewish history. Maimonides, in his code, he says that the loss of Beitar was every bit as terrible as the loss of the temple. The revisionist Zionist youth group is called takes the name Beitar, with the name of to be inspired by what we have gone through as a people. And by tradition, this fortress fell. This fortress fell on the 9th of Av. And so I hope that we've put some flesh on the skeleton here of this Mishnah to talk about the events that the 5 events that befell our ancestors on the 17th of Tammuz and the 5 events that befell them on the 9th of Av. There's a popular teaching that goes around whenever you have a list like this. You always want to make a compare and contrast. And you start with the compare. You have 5 and 5. But what about the contrast? What about the contrast? And when people read the 5 events of Tammuz, they say that, well, I'll give you the punchline first. The punchline is that in sort of Jewish typology, in geographical typology, there are 2 mountains. The first mountain is Mount Sinai, the mountain in which we receive the revelation from God. And the second mountain is Mount Zion, the mountain that the temple is upon, the mountain that Abraham dedicates with the Akedah. And so on the one hand, we have this mountain we have a mountain that God chooses to give us revelation. And then it disappears. We don't know where it is. And then we have another mountain that's the center of the Jewish nation that we established. It's Zion because Abraham walked up the hill. So the punchline is that the first 5 of these is talking about the punishment is against all of the things that we had at Sinai, which is our lives as religious people. The tablets were broken. I mean, obviously the tablets are associated with Sinai, but the fact that our laws were taken away from us. The Tamid offering, which was the daily institution of the Torah. The city walls were breached. Apostamus burned the Torah. Obviously, it's against the Torah. It's against Sinai. And an idol was placed in the temple courtyard. I mean, the whole Torah is one long book about the dangers and the pitfalls of avodah zarah and of idolatry. And so all of these punishments seem to be directed against the Sinai part of Judaism, the religious part of Judaism. The second part seems to be directed against Zion, the national part of Judaism, the people part of Judaism. We weren't allowed to enter the land of Israel. You can't enter Israel. You can't enter Sinai. We're a people that's focused. We can't enter Zion. We're a people that's focused around a land. The first and second temples were destroyed. You might think of the temples as being just religious things, but they were the symbols of the nation. Those were the symbols of the nation. Rome destroyed the second temple. And when they did that, they thought that they were destroying the Jewish capital, that they were destroying the Jewish people, that there was nothing else. Beitar was captured, and Beitar is naturally the symbol of our national movement, our national aspirations, and the city of Jerusalem was plowed over. And when people they talk about this, they say that ultimately our goal is to consolidate these 2 things. But it's a journey, and so we bookend this period of 3 weeks with one set of punishments that assaults what it means to be religiously as a Jew, and we end with a set of punishments that assaults what it means to be as a people, as a Jew. Ultimately, we want all of these things to be restored and to thrive. And the verse that is always taken to epitomize this is the verse from Yeshayahu that we say every time we take out the Sefer Torah, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, which combines all of them. I mean, it's that Sion will be restored, and Sion will be the place where Torah, where the religious part of Judaism flows from. And so that's a nice story. As I said, that's not my story. It's a popular. You hear that around the water cooler a bit this time of year. And with that, I've spoken for 40 minutes. And this has covered really what I wanted to cover with this class. In a next week's class, we're going to talk about the halachas and the customs of these 3 weeks. And for the final class, we'll talk about, we'll just put it on the table. Should we as Jews, should we as conservative Jews be doing the fast of Av? And should we, as Jews that live in an era where Jerusalem has been restored a bit? I mean, Jerusalem's not the Jerusalem that we encounter when we visit the land of Israel looks nothing like the Jerusalem we read about in the keynote and in Eicha. And given that, should we consider changes to Jewish practice? I thank you for joining me tonight, and I will stay on a few minutes if there are questions. So Barry writes that Jews are currently prevented from praying on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Yes, and there's a couple aspects to that. I mean, there's the overarching aspect is that in the name of peace, we want to appease people who are going to be upset with us if we allow Jews to go up there and walk around. And it's just easier to say we're not going to let Jews do that. I don't think that that's a great solution to the problem. But I can see why people would want to do that. What is changing though is that it used to be the case that it was thought that religious Jews should not go up onto the mount anyway. There were signs posted around it by the rabbinate that said that you should know that Torah law forbids Jews from walking around on Har Habayit, with the Temple Mount, because we don't want them to walk in a place where somebody who is not in a state of purity is supposed to walk. So it was the culture. It was the culture that religious Jews didn't do that. That has changed. One, people have pointed out that if as a religious matter Jews can't walk around up there that are in an impure state, I mean, Gentiles aren't supposed to be walking up around there in an impure state either. I mean, it's a strange point of view it's a strange religious point of view to be singling out Jews to keep them off the mount. But also the political reality has affected things. Because the absence of Jews on the Mount gave an opening. It gave an opening for those who'd said that, the claims of the temple were always fraudulent. Jews don't care about this place. And to prove it, they're not up here. To prove it, their own rabbis forbid them to coming up here. The fact that the absence of Jews going up there, the absence of religious Jews going up there was used against us has changed the culture, and it's resulted in religious Jews become very interested in going up there, learning about the sorts of the purification you have to undergo. You have to do a mikvah first, learning about the places one may and may not walk. And religious Jews have become very interested in going up there, and it's increased tensions a little bit. But did I address your comment, Barry? Muslims on the Temple's Mount have been destroying many Jewish artifacts. I've seen those reports too, and I don't know that that's the case. I know that both sides accuse each other of damaging each other's artifacts. The Muslims are always accusing us of trying to bring the whole thing down with our excavations of the tunnels under it. They say we're going to cause the entire thing to collapse. But just as a stereotype, sometimes stereotypes are true. I think it's that it's better for it's better for artifacts to be in the hands of the West. The West is much more interested in preserving them, and whether it's as Christians or as Jews. I mean, it's very sad, but there's a movement in Islam to destroy these things, and that's just a catastrophe. A large part of the second half of the 20th century was spent trying to repatriate things that Western archaeologists took from Middle Eastern countries, and many of these repatriated artifacts were destroyed after they were repatriated because of political instability in the Middle East. So I think that it would be. I think it's always better to be. I think it's always better to be accused of racism and to save the artifacts than to have people think and people not call you a racist and have the artifacts destroyed. The Muslims want to disprove the fact that the Jewish people have a historical connection to the land of Israel and the temple site specifically. Absolutely. It's there's no question about that's an agenda, and I'm kind of a squish about it, if you want to call me a squish. I don't think we should plow down the Dome of Rock and build a temple. I think that there should be space for all peoples up there, and the Muslims have an attachment to the place too. I don't. So I'm kind of a squish about it, but I think that I think there really needs to be more openness on their side as well. That Jews should be allowed to walk around. Religious Jews should be allowed to walk around there without being harassed. If you're a secular Jew, I mean, if you're not walking around with a kippah, or you're not praying, or you're just pretending to be a tourist, I don't think there's any difficulty with taking in the sites as a secular tourist. I mean, Christians walk up there and they see the Dome of Rock, and you can't go in, or they can see the mosque. And I think Jews can, if you want to pretend not to be Jewish, you can do that too. But I think that people who are visible Jews and who are just engaged in the act of praying, I mean, we're not up there to destroy their property, and certainly not to be aggressive, but to just be up there with a kippah on, with your seat out, and to say a psalm. I think that should be allowed. And in fact, I'm confident that I'm right about that. So it's, again, I'll wish you a good night. These things are going up on YouTube, and I'm worried that people are just waiting to watch them on YouTube and not coming to the class. So we're going to have to think of some sort of ways to entice people to come onto these live sessions, because for me this is the most fun. The Israeli police and the Muslim authorities do not allow Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. That the Muslim authorities are. I mean, the Muslim authorities do it with the complete cooperation and blessing of the Israeli authorities. Thank you all. Have a lovely evening.